In the autumn of 1945, as the world's attention was fixed on the grand, righteous theater of Nuremberg, where Nazi monsters were paraded before judges to answer for their crimes against humanity, a profoundly different kind of negotiation was taking place in a quiet, smoke-filled office in Tokyo. There were no cameras, no world press, and no lofty ideals of justice. There was only a cold, pragmatic transaction. On one side, a man whose scientific work involved freezing living infants, dissecting conscious farmers, and unleashing plague upon entire villages. On the other, officers of the United States government, holding the power of the noose. The deal they struck was simple and diabolical: full immunity from prosecution in exchange for the data. Not data from machines or petri dishes, but data meticulously extracted from the agonized bodies of thousands of men, women, and children. This is the hidden origin story of the Cold War's darkest science, the story of how America, in its quest for supremacy, looked into the abyss of Unit 731, and instead of condemning it, bought its ledger of nightmares. To understand the magnitude of this bargain, you must first journey to the windswept, frozen plains of Japanese-occupied Manchuria in the 1930s. Here, under the command of Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, a cunning and ambitious army surgeon with a doctorate in microbiology, the Imperial Japanese Army constructed a massive, secret complex near the city of Harbin. Outwardly, it was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army, a benign public health outfit. Inwardly, it was a purpose-built hell known as Unit 731. Spanning over 6 square kilometers, the compound was a city of suffering, featuring its own airport, railway spur, dungeons, crematoria, and state-of-the-art laboratories. Its purpose was the research and development of biological and chemical weapons, but its methodology was pure, unadulterated sadism disguised as science. The test subjects were not volunteers, not animals. They were human beings, referred to in official logs by the dehumanizing term maruta, logs of wood. They were an estimated 3,000 to 12,000 people. Chinese peasants, Korean resistance fighters, Russian émigrés, Allied POWs, political prisoners, and, in the most chilling of all details, pregnant women and infants, all imprisoned and stripped of their identities, becoming nothing more than experimental material. The experiments conducted within the walls of Unit 731 and its satellite facilities were a systematic encyclopedia of human suffering, designed to simulate every possible battlefield condition for the Japanese war machine. Victims were tied to stakes on open-air proving grounds, while aircraft dropped ceramic bombs filled with bubonic plague, anthrax, or typhoid, their subsequent agonizing deaths timed and documented. Others were locked inside hermetically sealed pressure chambers until their lungs exploded or their eyes were forced from their sockets, all to study the effects of high-altitude aerial bailouts. In the brutal Manchurian winters, prisoners were taken outside, their arms and legs deliberately frozen with water and fans until they turned black and gangrenous. Scientists would then smash the frozen limbs with hammers, studying the sound, or attempt to thaw them, to observe the progression of necrosis, often resulting in amputation and a slow septic death. The most infamous practice, however, was the vivisection. A prisoner, perhaps infected with plague or syphilis, would be taken to an operating theater. They would be strapped down, fully conscious, without any anesthetic, deemed a contaminant to the purity of the data. Surgeons, wearing only masks and aprons, would then dissect the living person. They would remove organs, one by one, the liver, the kidneys, the brain, to observe the real-time effect of disease. The heart would often still be beating when lifted from the chest cavity. These procedures were performed not by rogue monsters in back rooms, but by esteemed medical professors and promising students from Japan's top universities who viewed the Maruta as less than human, a natural resource to be mined for academic and military advancement. Women were forcibly impregnated, only to be infected with diseases and dissected to see the effect on the fetus. In one documented case, a mother and her newborn child were placed in a sealed room and gassed, with scientists timing how long it took for the infant to stop crying. Beyond the laboratory, Unit 731's work was field-tested with apocalyptic results. The unit operated a massive flea-breeding factory capable of producing 45 pounds of plague-infested fleas per month. These biological vectors were loaded into specially designed Uji porcelain bombs and dropped over Chinese cities like Ningbo and Changde, initiating devastating epidemics that killed an estimated 400,000 civilians. This was not collateral damage. It was a calculated, large-scale experiment in epidemic warfare. As the tide of war turned against Japan in 1945, General Ishii, a master of self-preservation, gave the order to destroy the Ping Fang complex. Surviving prisoners were executed with cyanide or machine guns. The barracks, laboratories, and prison blocks were dynamited. But Ishii, understanding the unique value of his work, gave a counter-order. The core research was to be saved. Thousands of pages of typed reports, meticulously detailed dissection diagrams, pathological tissue slides, and film reels were packed into steel trunks. The pickled organs of victims, preserved in formaldehyde, were carefully crated. This knowledge was his ransom. In the chaotic summer of 1945, as U.S. forces occupied Japan, whispers of these special weapons programs reached American intelligence. A young, enterprising microbiologist from the U.S. Army's Fort Detrick Biological Weapons Program, Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders, was dispatched to Japan to investigate. He was initially stonewalled, but through a combination of persuasion and implied immunity, the gates began to open. Sanders and later his more aggressive successor, Norbert Fell, were given glimpses of the data. They were horrified, but also professionally mesmerized. At Fort Detrick, American scientists were struggling. Their research, constrained by ethics and limited to animal testing, was hitting walls. How much anthrax did it truly take to kill a human? How did plague bacteria move through the lymphatic system in real time? The Japanese data offered irrefutable, if grotesque, answers. A fierce, top-secret debate erupted in Washington. One faction, led by State Department officials, demanded prosecution for crimes against humanity. The other, led by the advocates of biological weapons and Cold War preparedness, argued with cold logic. This data was a national security asset of incalculable value. The Soviets would surely try to capture it. Could America afford to hang the men who possessed it? General Douglas MacArthur, the supreme commander of the Allied powers in Japan, became the architect of the deal. His primary goal was a stable, anti-communist Japan, not a prolonged hunt for war criminals. In a secret 1947 memo to Washington, MacArthur's headquarters stated it had acquired data that was of great value, and that the value to the U.S. of Japanese BW data is of such importance to national security as to far outweigh the value of prosecuting the Japanese criminals. So what is the final ledger of Unit 731? On one side, a trove of data whose actual military utility remains fiercely debated by scientists, many of whom argue its crude, sadistic methods yielded little of reliable, applicable value. On the other side, the wholesale abandonment of the very moral authority America claimed to wield in victory. It was the moment the liberators became accomplices, choosing to harness the products of a factory of death rather than demolish its very blueprint. The story of Unit 731 is not just a Japanese war crime. It is a shared, buried crime of convenience. It forces us to confront the most uncomfortable calculus of power. How far into the darkness are we willing to walk? And what pieces of our soul do we leave behind in the trade? The files are partially open now. The pickled specimens still exist in forgotten archives. But the stain of that quiet deal in Tokyo, the choice to pay the devil rather than slay him, remains an indelible black mark on the scroll of history, a warning that the greatest perils are not always in the weapons we fear, but in the compromises we are willing to make.